Hi, I'm Eryndor Valtric, and this isn't just a story about a promotion. It's about the moment I walked into my boss's office after 8 years of grinding, only to see my own brother Vorric shaking hands over the senior director role I'd earned. My project, my numbers, my strategy. But he'd copied my presentation files, pitched my ideas as his own, and claimed the vision was always his. But the truth, that moment was just the tip of the iceberg. He'd been CCing himself on my confidential emails for months, meeting with my clients behind my back, and feeding my boss narratives that I was losing my edge. And worst of all, my own team, people I'd mentored, nodded along like it made sense. I stayed quiet for 2 weeks. Then I walked into HR with a smile and my resignation letter. What would you do if your own blood erased 8 years of your life? Would you fight or would you disappear? Let me tell you what I did. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The elevator ride up to the 20th floor felt longer than usual that Tuesday morning. I'd been at Apex Innovations for 8 years, climbing from junior analyst to project lead, and today was supposed to be the day everything paid off. My boss, Jonathan Kress, had scheduled a meeting for 9 a.m. sharp. The subject line read, Senior Director Role, Final Discussion. I'd spent 3 months preparing for this. Late nights refining the Q3 strategy proposal, weekend calls with international clients, presentation after presentation to the board, showing how my data infrastructure project had saved the company $4.2 million in operational costs. The numbers didn't lie, I was ready. The office was quieter than normal when I stepped out on the executive floor. Sarah from accounting gave me a strange look as I passed, then quickly turned back to her screen. I brushed it off. Maybe she was having a rough morning. Jonathan's door was closed, but I could see shadows moving through the frosted glass. I checked my watch, 8:58 a.m. early, but not too early. I knocked twice, firm but respectful. "Come in," Jonathan's voice called out. I pushed the door open, and my entire world tilted sideways. Vorric was sitting in the chair across from Jonathan's desk. My brother, the one who'd bounced between marketing gigs for the past 5 years, never staying anywhere longer than 18 months. He wore a navy suit I didn't recognize, his hair slicked back in that confident way he'd always managed to pull off, even when he had nothing to back it up. But it wasn't just that he was there, it was the way he sat, relaxed, one ankle crossed over his knee like he owned the room. And worse, the way Jonathan was smiling at him, that approving smile I'd worked 8 years to earn. "Eryndor, perfect timing," Jonathan said, standing up. "I wanted you to hear this from me directly." My throat went dry. I stayed in the doorway, feet suddenly concrete. Jonathan gestured toward Vorric. "We've decided to move forward with Vorric for the Senior Director of Strategic Operations role." His vision for the department's future really resonated with the executive team. His vision. Those 2 words hit like a punch to the gut. Vorric stood up, extended his hand toward me. "No hard feelings, brother. You know how these things go. May the best man win, right?" I stared at his hand, didn't take it. Jonathan cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. "Vorric's been working closely with the team for the past 2 months. He's really grasped the intricacies of the infrastructure project." "My project." He said it like it was a shared thing, something Vorric had contributed to. 2 months? I heard myself say. My voice sounded distant, not quite mine. "Yes," Jonathan confirmed, shuffling papers on his desk. "He's been shadowing, attending client meetings, really immersing himself in the workflow. Fresh perspective, you know. The board was impressed with his presentation last week." Presentation. Last week. I'd been at the Hillcrest conference last week, representing Apex at the annual Tech Innovation Summit. I'd told Jonathan I'd present the Q4 strategy when I returned. He'd said, "No rush, take your time." But Vorric had presented, without me knowing, using my work. "What presentation?" I asked, each word carefully measured. Vorric jumped in, that easy charm rolling off him like it always did. "The one about scaling our data infrastructure across international markets. You know, the whole framework we've been developing." He said we. "I developed that framework," I said flatly, "alone, for 3 years." Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. "Well, Vorric's brought some innovative angles to it." Fresh energy. The board felt he had the leadership presence we need for this expansion phase. Leadership presence, code for charisma. Code for the kind of smooth talking that had always come naturally to Vorric. The kind that made people overlook the fact that he'd never built anything from the ground up in his life. "Where did you get the presentation materials?" I asked Vorric directly, ignoring Jonathan now. Vorric smiled, but something flickered behind his eyes. "From the shared drive. Everything's collaborative here, right? That's what makes Apex great." The shared drive. The one I'd uploaded my draft strategy to 3 weeks ago. Password protected, with team access only. The one I'd been refining before the final board presentation I was supposed to give this week. "I see," I said quietly. Jonathan stepped forward, trying to smooth things over. "Eryndor, you're still a valued member of this team. We're not going anywhere. This doesn't change your contributions." But it did. It changed everything. Because in that moment, standing in that office with my brother sitting in the position I'd earned and my boss looking at me like I was the one being unreasonable, I realized something fundamental had shifted. Vorric hadn't just taken a promotion, he'd taken my credibility, my work. 8 years of proving myself, and with one presentation, he'd rewritten the story so that he was the visionary, and I was just the guy who'd helped out. "Congratulations," I finally said to Vorric. My voice was steady, but my hands weren't. I shoved them in my pockets. "Thanks, man," Vorric said, clapping me on the shoulder as he moved toward the door. "I'm sure we'll work great together. I'll need your expertise as we move forward." My expertise. Like I was going to be his assistant now. He left, and Jonathan sat back down, already pulling up his calendar like the conversation was over. "Is there anything else?" I asked. Jonathan looked up, almost surprised I was still there. "No, that's all. We'll have a team meeting this afternoon to announce it officially. Try to be supportive, okay? It's good for morale." I nodded once and walked out. The office felt different as I made my way back to my desk. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher. The hum of computers and muted conversations sounded distant, like I was underwater. People glanced at me as I passed. Some looked away quickly. Others offered weak, sympathetic smiles. They already knew. Everyone knew before I did. I sat down at my desk and stared at my computer screen. My inbox had 43 unread messages. The top one was from Vorric, sent at 7:14 a.m. this morning, just before the meeting. The subject line read, "Looking forward to working together." I didn't open it. Instead, I pulled up the shared drive, navigated to my project folder. The strategy document I'd uploaded 3 weeks ago had been accessed 17 times. 17. I clicked on the access log. Vorric's name appeared 12 times. The first access was 6 weeks ago, long before he'd officially joined any meetings I knew about. He'd been copying my work for over a month. But it was the other names that made my stomach turn. 3 of my direct reports had accessed it too, forwarding sections to Vorric's email. My own team had been feeding him everything. I sat back in my chair, the office buzzing around me like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. And I was done pretending it hadn't. I didn't go to the team meeting that afternoon. I called in sick, said I had a migraine, which wasn't entirely a lie. My head was pounding by noon, pressure building behind my eyes like a storm I couldn't release. I drove home on autopilot, barely registering the traffic lights or the exits. When I pulled into my apartment parking lot, I just sat there for a while, engine off, staring at nothing. That's when the memories started flooding back. Not the fresh wound from this morning, but the older ones. The scars I'd convinced myself had healed. I remembered being 14, building a model rocket for the regional science fair. I'd spent 3 months on it, calculating trajectories, testing engine configurations, documenting every detail in a leather notebook Dad had given me. The night before the fair, Vorric asked if he could see it. Just to look, he said. The next morning, my rocket was in pieces on the garage floor. Vorric said it was an accident, that he'd been trying to help me pack it and it slipped. But I found his own half-finished model in the trash, abandoned like all his projects. I ended up presenting the broken pieces, explaining what it was supposed to do. Vorric presented nothing, but somehow he got more sympathy for trying to help his little brother and having it go wrong. Mom said I needed to forgive him. Dad said accidents happen. I was 22 when it happened again. I'd written a senior thesis on algorithmic trading patterns, something I'd been researching for 2 years. It was good enough that my professor said it could be published. I'd shown it to Vorric during Thanksgiving break, proud, wanting to share something I'd accomplished. 3 months later, he landed a job at a trading firm in Oakmont Heights. During his interview, he discussed innovative algorithmic approaches, citing insights that sounded remarkably familiar. I found out from his girlfriend at the time, Talise, who mentioned how impressed she was that he'd come up with such complex ideas. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He got the job. I graduated and took an entry position at a mid-tier analytics company, still trying to get my thesis published, only to be told the concepts had already been explored in recent industry presentations. When I confronted Vorric, he laughed it off. "It's not like you trademarked your ideas, Aaron. Information wants to be free, right? Besides, I barely remembered what you wrote about. Must have just been in the air." In the air, like osmosis. Like my 2 years of work had just floated into his brain by accident. I let it go, again. Because that's what I did. That's what I'd always done. 5 years ago, I started at Apex. It was supposed to be my fresh start, a place where I could build something without Vorric's shadow hanging over me. For the first 3 years, it worked. I was good at my job, great even. People noticed. I got promoted twice, earned respect from the senior team, started building the data infrastructure that would become my legacy project. Then Vorric called. He'd just been let go from his 4th job in as many years, something about creative differences with management. He needed help, just for a little while. Could I put in a word at Apex, maybe something in marketing or client relations, just to get his foot in the door? I said no at first, told him I didn't think it was a good idea, that mixing family and work could get messy. He played the brother card, said I was the only one who believed in him, that everyone else had given up. Mom called me that night, said Vorric was really struggling, that family helped family. So I caved. I talked to Jonathan, mentioned that my brother had marketing experience and client-facing skills. I vouched for him, put my reputation on the line. Vorric got hired as a junior client liaison 3 months later. I made sure we were in different departments, convinced myself it would be fine as long as we weren't working directly together. It was fine at first. He was charming in client meetings, good at reading the room, making people feel heard. I'd see him in the break room sometimes, always surrounded by people, always laughing about something. He had that gift, that ability to make people like him instantly. I didn't mind. I was focused on my work, on building something real. But then I started noticing small things. He'd show up at my project meetings uninvited, saying Jonathan had suggested he sit in to learn the technical side. He'd ask questions that seemed innocent but were really fishing for information. How did you solve that database integration issue? What's your timeline for the international rollout? Who are your key contacts at the client companies? I answered because it seemed petty not to. Because he was my brother. Because saying no would make me look territorial. Then 6 months ago, I started getting feedback from Jonathan that felt off. Little comments like, "Make sure you're keeping the team in the loop," and "I'm hearing some concerns about siloed information." I'd been transparent the entire time, shared every update, included everyone in documentation. But the comments kept coming. I found out later, much later, that Vorric had been having lunch with Jonathan every Thursday. Casual, friendly conversations about the company's direction, about team dynamics, about how some people were great at execution but lacked strategic vision. He never said my name, he didn't have to. He'd plant seeds. "You know, I've been thinking about how we could scale Aaron's framework internationally. With some adjustments to the leadership approach, some fresh messaging, I think it could really take off." Jonathan heard a collaborative team player. I heard someone auditioning for my job. 3 months ago, Vorric started getting CC'd on my emails. I thought it was an administrative error at first. Then I realized Jonathan was doing it deliberately, to keep everyone aligned. Soon, Vorric was in every meeting, contributing just enough to seem involved, but never enough to actually do the work. And the team, my team, they started turning to him for input. Not because he knew more, but because he had that thing, that ease that made people want to follow him. I watched my authority erode in real time. Watched Vorric smile and nod and take credit for ideas I'd spent years developing. Watched him reframe my work as collaborative effort. Watched him position himself as the bridge between technical execution and strategic vision. I told myself it wasn't happening. that I was being paranoid, that surely Jonathan could see through it. But sitting in my car that afternoon, staring at my apartment building, I finally admitted the truth. This wasn't new. This was the pattern. This was what Vorric did, what he'd always done. He found what I built, made it his, and convinced everyone it had been his all along. And I'd let him. Every single time. Because confronting him meant confronting the rest of the family. It meant being the one who couldn't let things go, who held grudges, who couldn't just be happy for his brother's success. It meant being alone. So I'd stayed quiet, convinced myself it wasn't that bad, that next time would be different. But this time, he hadn't just taken credit. He'd taken the future I'd been building for 8 years. And he'd done it with my own work, my own strategy, my own credibility. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old messages. Found one from 2 months ago. Vorric asking about my presentation timeline, saying he wanted to make sure his client updates didn't overlap with my strategy rollout. I'd told him everything, even sent him the draft outline so he could avoid redundancy. I'd handed him the blueprint to steal my job. My hands were shaking now, but not from shock anymore. From something else. Something colder, sharper. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let it go. For the first time, I was going to make sure everyone saw exactly what Vorric was. But I had to be smart about it. Emotional confrontations would make me look bitter. Accusations without proof would make me look paranoid. No, if I was going to do this, I needed evidence. Documentation. Witnesses. I needed to build a case so airtight that not even Vorric's charm could wriggle out of it. I got out of the car and walked to my apartment, mind already working through the next steps. Because Vorric had taught me something valuable over the years, even if he didn't realize it. He'd taught me exactly how to take someone down without them seeing it coming. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, a legal pad, and a growing sense of clarity that felt almost dangerous. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. I'd made coffee around midnight, forgot to drink it, made another pot at 2 a.m. I started with the emails. I went back 6 months, methodically combing through every message, every CC, every forwarded thread. What I found wasn't just evidence of theft. It was a blueprint of systematic erasure. There was the email from Vorric to Jonathan 2 months ago. I've been reviewing Aaron's infrastructure framework, and I think I see some opportunities to elevate it to a more strategic level. Would love to discuss over lunch. Elevate it. Like it needed fixing. Like my 3 years of work required his intervention to be worthwhile. Jonathan's response. Great initiative. Let's talk Thursday. Then another 3 weeks later, Vorric to Jonathan. Attached is my refined version of the Q4 strategy. I've incorporated Aaron's technical groundwork with a more market-forward approach. I think this is what the board's looking for. His refined version, his approach. I opened the attachment. It was my strategy document, word for word in some sections, with minor phrasing changes in others. Enough to claim he'd contributed, not enough to be obviously plagiarized. But the metadata didn't lie. The original creation date was mine. The bulk of the content was mine. He'd just polished the surface and slapped his name on it. I kept digging. There were chat logs I'd forgotten about. Messages in the company Slack where Vorric gradually positioned himself as the thought leader. Someone would ask a question about the infrastructure project, and before I could respond, Vorric would jump in with an answer, usually something I'd explained to him days earlier. Great question. The way we've approached this is we. Always we. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. An email thread between Vorric and 3 of my direct reports, Kress, Sylvan, and Fendrel. The subject line was Project Strategy Alignment. Vorric's message, Hey team, as we move into this next phase, I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Aaron's been a bit scattered lately, seems overwhelmed with the workload. I'm here to help shoulder some of that leadership burden. If you have concerns or need direction, my door's always open. Scattered, overwhelmed. I read it 3 times, each time feeling the words dig deeper. Kress had responded, Thanks for stepping up. We've noticed he's been distant during meetings. Distant. Because I'd been at the Hillcrest conference representing the company. Because I'd been in client calls closing deals. Because I'd been doing my job. Sylvan added, Yeah, it's been hard to get clear direction lately. Good to know you're available. And Fendrel, who I'd personally mentored for 2 years, Appreciate this. The project needs strong leadership right now. Strong leadership. The implication being I wasn't providing it. These were people I'd trusted, people I'd trained, advocated for, fought to get raises and promotions. And Vorric had turned them against me with a few carefully worded messages. He hadn't just stolen my work, he'd poisoned my reputation. I sat back, staring at the screen until my vision blurred. This was the moment I understood something fundamental. I'd spent 8 years building a career, and Vorric had spent 2 months dismantling it. Not with better work, not with superior skills, but with narrative control. He'd told a better story, made himself the hero and me the supporting character. And everyone believed it because people want to believe charismatic leaders, especially ones who make them feel included and valued. I'd been operating in a different game entirely. I thought competence mattered. I thought results spoke for themselves. I thought if I just kept my head down and did excellent work, success would follow. But Vorric knew the truth. Perception mattered more than reality. The story you told about yourself mattered more than the work you actually did. And he'd been telling his story while I'd been silent. The question now wasn't whether to fight back, it was how. I could go to Jonathan, show him the emails, the metadata, the timeline, but Jonathan had already chosen Vorric. He'd seen what he wanted to see, because Vorric had made it easy for him. Showing him evidence now would just make me look bitter, like the guy who couldn't handle losing. I could go to HR, but HR existed to protect the company, not employees. And what would I say? My brother took credit for my work? They'd see a family squabble, not corporate malfeasance. I could confront Vorric directly, but I'd done that before. With the thesis, with the science fair, with everything else. He'd just deflect, minimize, make me feel crazy for even bringing it up. No, if I was going to do this, I needed to be smarter than all of that. I needed to let Vorric destroy himself. Because there was one thing I knew about my brother that nobody else seemed to see. His success was built on foundations he didn't understand. He could steal the blueprint, but he couldn't actually build the house. The infrastructure framework he'd presented wasn't just a document. It was a complex system with dependencies, technical requirements, and implementation challenges that required deep knowledge to navigate. Vorric had the pitch, but he didn't have the expertise. And sooner or later, someone was going to ask him to actually execute, to make decisions, to solve problems, to prove he knew what he was talking about. That's when the cracks would show. My job wasn't to expose him. My job was to make sure I wasn't there to save him when he failed. I pulled up a blank document and started writing. Not an accusation, not a complaint. A resignation letter. It took me 20 minutes to write and another hour to perfect. Professional, gracious, expressing gratitude for the opportunities, citing a desire to pursue new challenges, offering a 2-week transition period. No mention of Vorric. No hint of conflict. Just a clean, respectful exit. Because the last thing I wanted was to give anyone a reason to think I was leaving, because I couldn't handle the decision. I needed to leave on my terms, with my dignity intact. But before I submitted it, I needed to do one more thing. I opened a new folder on my desktop and started compiling files. Every piece of original work. Every timestamped document. Every email chain showing the development of my ideas. I organized it chronologically, created a clear narrative of what I'd built and when. I encrypted the folder, backed it up to 3 separate locations, and saved a copy to a secure cloud drive only I could access. Then I drafted one more document, a detailed timeline of Vorric's involvement with the project, cross-referenced with his actual contributions. Meetings where he said nothing substantive. Documents he'd claimed credit for without adding value. Decisions I'd made that he'd later presented as his own. It was thorough, factual, and devastating, and I saved it with a simple title, Reference Materials. I wasn't going to use it unless I had to. But if Vorric's house of cards started falling, and if anyone came looking for answers, I'd have them ready. The sun was starting to rise when I finally closed my laptop. My eyes burned from staring at screens all night, but my mind was clear for the first time in months. I'd spent years believing that silence was strength, that not making waves was the same as taking the high road. But I'd been wrong. Silence wasn't strength, it was surrender. And I was done surrendering. I picked up my phone and sent a calendar invite to Jonathan for first thing Monday morning. Subject line, important career discussion. Then I forwarded my resignation letter to my personal email, ready to send when the time came. Vorric thought he'd won. He thought I'd slink away, wounded and defeated, too proud to cause a scene. He was half right. I wasn't going to cause a scene. I was going to disappear. And when I did, there'd be no one left to clean up his mess. Because the thing about stealing someone's work is that you also inherit their responsibilities. And Vorric had no idea what he'd actually signed up for. I finally drank the cold coffee sitting on my table, smiled for the first time in 24 hours, and went to take a shower. Monday was going to be interesting. Monday morning came with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything feel sharper, more real. I dressed carefully. Pressed shirt, tie I usually saved for board presentations, shoes I'd polished the night before. If I was going to walk out of Apex Innovations, I was going to look like someone who'd already moved on to something better. The office was buzzing when I arrived. Vorric's promotion had been officially announced Friday afternoon, and apparently, there'd been a celebration at Mason's bar that I hadn't been invited to. I caught fragments of conversation as I walked to my desk. Did you see his vision for Q4? Revolutionary. Finally, some fresh leadership energy. Vorric just gets it, you know? I kept my face neutral, nodded politely when people glanced my way, and settled into my chair. I had 20 minutes before my meeting with Jonathan. I spent those minutes doing something I should have done months ago. I documented everything. I opened the project repository and methodically downloaded every file I'd created. Design documents, technical specifications, implementation roadmaps. I noted the creation dates, the version histories, the comment threads that showed my decision-making process. Then I went further. I pulled performance reviews from the past 8 years. Every quarterly assessment, every annual evaluation, every email from Jonathan praising specific achievements. I compiled a timeline of my career progression, highlighting the projects I'd led, the revenue I'd generated, the problems I'd solved. It wasn't just evidence. It was a story. A clear, undeniable narrative of who'd built what. I encrypted it all, stored it in my secure cloud, and created a backup on a USB drive that I slipped into my pocket. At 8:58 a.m., I stood up and walked to Jonathan's office. He was already there, coffee in hand, looking slightly uncomfortable. He probably expected me to argue about the promotion, to plead my case, maybe even get emotional. I sat down and handed him a printed letter. My resignation. Effective 2 weeks from today. He blinked, clearly thrown. Aaron, wait, let's talk about this. I know you're disappointed, but... I'm not disappointed, I said calmly. I've been here 8 years. It's time for something new. I appreciate everything Apex has done for my career. Jonathan set down the letter, studying my face like he was trying to find the catch. This is sudden. Is this about Vorric? This is about me wanting to grow in ways that aren't possible here anymore. I've hit my ceiling, it's not personal. He leaned back, looking almost relieved. No drama, no accusations, just a clean exit. Where are you going? I have some opportunities I'm exploring. Nothing finalized yet. That was true. I hadn't applied anywhere. But I would. And with my track record, I wouldn't have trouble landing somewhere better. Well, Jonathan said slowly, if this is really what you want, we'll make the transition as smooth as possible. I assume you'll do a proper handoff with Vorric? There it was. The expectation that I'd spend my last 2 weeks training my replacement, teaching Vorric everything he needed to know to succeed in the role he'd stolen. Of course, I said. I'll document everything. Jonathan smiled, tension draining from his shoulders. Good. That's very professional of you, Aaron. This doesn't have to be messy. No, I agreed. It doesn't. I left his office and went straight to my desk. I had 2 weeks to execute the plan forming in my mind, and I couldn't waste time. First, I needed to understand exactly how deep Vorric's deception went. He'd stolen my work, but had he stolen from others too? Had he made promises he couldn't keep? Had he oversold his capabilities? I started with the people closest to the situation, my former team. I invited Kress to lunch. She accepted, probably feeling awkward about the whole situation. We met at a quiet cafe 3 blocks from the office. I heard you're leaving, she said, stirring her salad without eating. That's a surprise. Time for a change, I said easily. But I want to make sure the transition goes smoothly. Vorric's gonna need support. She nodded, still not making eye contact. He seems really prepared. Does he? I asked, genuine curiosity in my voice. What's he said about the implementation phase? Kress hesitated. He's mentioned some high-level strategy stuff. Client engagement, market positioning. Why? Just making sure we're aligned. The technical rollout is pretty complex. Has he gone over the database migration timeline with you? Not specifically. What about the API integration challenges, the ones with the Frankfurt office? She shook her head. He said he'd loop us in once he had a clearer picture. I nodded slowly, taking a bite of my sandwich. That makes sense. He's probably still getting up to speed on the technical details. Yeah, Kayla said, but doubt flickered across her face. Probably. I left it there. Didn't push, didn't accuse, just planted a seed of question. I had similar conversations with Sylvan and Fendrell over the next 2 days. Each time, I'd ask simple, technical questions about the project. Each time, they'd admit Vorric hadn't actually discussed those aspects yet. By Wednesday, I could see the first cracks of uncertainty forming. They'd realize soon enough that Vorric had the pitch but not the knowledge. Next, I turned to documentation. Vorric expected me to hand over everything, and I would. But I'd hand over exactly what I was obligated to provide and nothing more. I created transition documents that were technically complete but strategically useless. I listed the systems, the workflows, the key contacts, all of it accurate. But I left out the nuance, the institutional knowledge, the hard-won lessons about what worked and what didn't. I documented the what, but not the why or the how. Any competent engineer could read those documents and execute the project. But Vorric wasn't a competent engineer. He was a salesman who'd sold himself into a technical role. I also reached out to allies outside my immediate team. Orlith from legal, who'd worked with me on contract negotiations. Lunara from finance, who'd helped me build the cost-benefit models. Tallis from client services, who'd coordinated international rollouts. I didn't trash Vorric. I didn't have to. I just asked them to be available for questions, mentioned that the new leadership might need some guidance getting up to speed, and thanked them for their support over the years. Each conversation reinforced the same message. I was the one who'd built this. I was the one with the relationships. I was the one people trusted. And when I left, that institutional knowledge left with me. By Friday of my first week, I'd set everything in motion. The documentation was complete but unhelpful. The team was quietly questioning Vorric's depth of knowledge. The key stakeholders knew I was leaving and were already nervous about continuity. I'd built a controlled demolition. All I had to do was walk away and let gravity do the rest. That afternoon, I had my final one-on-one with Vorric. He'd requested it, probably expecting me to be bitter or confrontational. Instead, I was cooperative, almost cheerful. So, he said, leaning back in his chair with that familiar confidence, I know this transition might be awkward, but I think we can make it work. You've built something solid here, and I'm excited to take it to the next level. I'm sure you are, I said neutrally. I've been reviewing your documentation. Very thorough. I try to be. Though I have to say, he continued, some of it's a bit dense. Technical stuff I'll need to dig into. It's a complex system. Right. Maybe you could walk me through some of the trickier aspects? The database architecture? The integration protocols? That kind of thing? I smiled slightly. All of that's in the documentation. I know, but it would help to hear it from you directly. You know how you process this stuff differently than the rest of us. Translation. He had no idea how any of it actually worked. I wish I could, I said, but my last day is Friday, and I've got a lot of final meetings to wrap up. Everything you need is in the files. You're smart, you'll figure it out. His jaw tightened, just slightly. Sure, of course. I stood up. Anything else? No, he said, voice a bit colder now. That's all. I left his office, knowing I'd just turned down his lifeline. He'd expected me to train him, to save him from his own incompetence. And I'd smiled and refused. That night, I had one more call to make. I dialed a number I'd found earlier in the week, one that had appeared in Vorric's email threads. A board member named Eryndor Valtric, the one who'd apparently been most impressed by Vorric's presentation. Mr. Castro, I said when he answered, this is Eryndor Valtric. I wanted to thank you personally for the opportunities I've had at Apex. Ah, yes, he said, sounding pleasantly surprised. I heard about your resignation. That's a loss for us. I appreciate that. I'm excited about what's next, but I wanted to make sure the transition is solid. I know the board has high expectations for the infrastructure expansion. We do. Vorric's vision is exactly what we've been looking for. He's certainly good at presenting, I said carefully. I'm confident the team will figure out the implementation details. There was a pause. Figure out? I thought the plan was fully developed. Oh, the strategy is there, the technical execution will just need some refinement. Nothing Vorric can't handle, I'm sure. He's got the resources. Another pause, longer this time. I see. I let the silence hang. Well, Castro said finally, thank you for reaching out. We'll keep an eye on the progress. I'm sure you will. Have a good evening, sir. I hung up and allowed myself a small smile. I had just put Vorric under a microscope. And when the board started watching closely, when they started asking technical questions, when they realized the vision didn't match the execution, they'd see exactly what I'd seen for years. All I had to do now was wait. My last week at Apex started with an email blast to the entire company. Subject line, exciting leadership announcement. I read it from my desk, coffee cooling beside my keyboard as the office slowly filled with morning chatter. We're thrilled to announce that Eryndor Valtric will be hosting an exclusive town hall this Thursday to unveil his strategic vision for Apex's next chapter. This is a pivotal moment for our organization, and we encourage all departments to attend. Vorric has been instrumental in architecting our path forward, and this presentation will outline the innovations that will position Apex as an industry leader for years to come. Instrumental in architecting, the corporate language practically glowed with praise. I glanced up and saw Vorric across the floor, surrounded by a small crowd of admirers. He was animated, gesturing broadly, probably describing his grand plans. Someone laughed. Someone else nodded enthusiastically. He looked like a man who'd finally found his stage. Over the next 2 days, I watched the hype build. The marketing team created promotional materials for the town hall. Someone hung a banner in the main conference room. Innovation starts here. The executive floor buzzed with energy, people speculating about what Vorric would announce. I kept my head down, finishing my transition tasks with mechanical precision. Every document filed, every system access transferred, every meeting attended with professional courtesy. On Tuesday, Vorric stopped by my desk. He looked good, confident, wearing a new suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Hey, Aaron," he said, hands in his pockets, casual. "I wanted to thank you for being so professional about all this. I know it wasn't easy." "It's business," I said simply, "nothing personal." "Still, I appreciate it." He paused, then added, "You're coming to the town hall, right, even though it's your last week?" "Wouldn't miss it." He grinned. "Good. I think you'll be impressed. I've taken what you started and really elevated it." Elevated, that word again. "I'm sure you have," I said. He lingered for a moment, like he wanted to say more, then thought better of it. "All right, see you Thursday." I watched him walk away, greeting people as he went, collecting smiles and admiration like currency. Wednesday arrived, and the office was practically vibrating with anticipation. The town hall was scheduled for 2 p.m. Thursday, and people were already talking about it like it was some kind of corporate Super Bowl. I spent Wednesday doing something I'd been saving for last. I sent individual emails to key stakeholders, thanking them for their collaboration over the years. To Oralith in legal, to Lunara in finance, to Talise in client services. I kept them brief, professional, genuine. Each email included a subtle line. "I know the upcoming transition will be challenging, but I'm confident the team will adapt. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need clarification on any of the technical foundations we built together." I wasn't planting doubt, I was planting insurance. If things went wrong, these people would remember I'd warned them, in my own way. Thursday morning, I arrived early. The conference room was already set up. Projection screen, wireless mic, chairs arranged in neat rows. Someone had placed bottles of sparkling water on a side table. Fresh flowers decorated the podium. This was Vorric's coronation. I took a seat in the back row as people filtered in. The room filled quickly. Department heads, senior managers, junior staff hoping to witness something important. Even some board members showed up, including Eryndor Castro. Jonathan opened with a brief introduction, praising Vorric's fresh perspective and innovative thinking. "Today marks a turning point for Apex. Vorric is going to show us the future." Vorric took the stage to enthusiastic applause. He looked comfortable, energized, like he'd been born to stand in front of a crowd. "Thank you, everyone," he began, his voice warm and engaging. "I'm excited to share the vision that's going to transform how Apex operates, how we serve our clients, and how we compete in this market." The first few slides were polished, high-level strategy points, Market analysis, competitive positioning. It was generic enough to sound impressive without saying much. But then he got to the technical section, the infrastructure expansion, the system architecture, my work. Our new data framework, he said, clicking to a slide that showed a complex diagram I'd created 6 months ago, is built on a revolutionary approach to distributed processing. He paused, looking at the slide like he was seeing it for the first time, which, in a real sense, he might have been. This architecture allows us to scale horizontally across multiple nodes, ensuring redundancy and performance. He was reading from note cards now, I realized. Memorized phrases. Someone in the audience, a senior engineer named Fendrel, raised his hand. Can you walk us through the failover protocols? How do we handle node degradation? Vorric blinked. The failover protocols are built into the system design. It's all automated. Right, but what's the specific mechanism? Are we using consensus algorithms, Raft, Paxos? Vorric smiled, but it was tighter now. The documentation covers the specifics. The key point is that it works seamlessly. Fendrel frowned slightly but didn't push further. Vorric moved on, clicking to the next slide. Client integration is another crucial component. We're implementing APIs that allow real-time data exchange. Lunara from Finance spoke up. What's the cost structure for the API maintenance? You mentioned scalability, but that's infrastructure heavy. Have we budgeted for the ongoing operational expenses? We've accounted for growth costs, Vorric said smoothly. It's all factored into the projections. Can you share those projections? I don't recall seeing updated cost models. They're in development. We'll have them finalized soon. I watched from the back row as the confidence in the room began to thin. Questions kept coming, each one more specific than the last, and Vorric's answers grew vaguer. What about data compliance for the Frankfurt expansion? GDPR requirements? We're working with legal on that. Security protocols for cross-border data transfer? Encrypted end-to-end, best practices. Which encryption standard? The industry standard. Eryndor Castro, the board member, leaned forward. Vorric, these are implementation details we need clarity on. The board approved this based on a comprehensive technical plan. Are you saying those details aren't finalized? Vorric's smile faltered. They're finalized in the documentation. What I'm presenting today is the strategic overview. We've seen strategic overviews, Castro said. We need to understand execution. The room had shifted. The excitement was gone, replaced by a growing unease. People were glancing at each other, whispering. Jonathan looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. Vorric tried to recover. Look, the vision here is what matters. The technical details, the execution, that's what teams are for. My role is to lead the direction, and that direction is clear. But it wasn't enough. The energy had curdled. What was supposed to be a triumphant moment had become an interrogation. The town hall ended 20 minutes early. People filed out quietly, the enthusiasm replaced by confusion and concern. I stayed in my seat, watching Vorric gather his notes with shaking hands. Jonathan approached him, speaking in low tones. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the tension in both their faces. As I stood to leave, Castro caught my eye. He walked over, expression unreadable. Valtric, he said quietly, you built the original framework, correct? I did. And you're leaving in 2 days. That's right. He studied me for a moment. This project, it's solid, isn't it? The foundation is there? The foundation is sound, I said, as long as someone understands how to build on it. He nodded slowly. I see. I excused myself and walked out of the conference room. In the hallway, I passed Vorric. He looked rattled, the confidence stripped away. That was rough, I said, stopping beside him. They ambushed me with technical questions, he muttered. That's not what today was supposed to be about. They're investors, I said. They want to know the plan works. The plan does work. Your plan worked. Then you should be able to explain it. He looked at me sharply. What's that supposed to mean? Just that understanding the work makes it easier to defend it. His jaw clenched. I understand it fine. Good. Because in 2 days, I'm gone, and it's all yours. I walked away, leaving him standing in the empty hallway. That night, I got a text from Kress. People are worried. Vorric couldn't answer basic questions. Do you think he actually knows what he's doing? I didn't respond. Friday, my last official day, was eerily quiet. No farewell party, no gathered well wishes. Just a few people stopping by my desk to say goodbye. Vorric didn't come by at all. At 5 p.m., I packed my personal items into a box, logged out of my computer for the last time, and walked out of Apex Innovations. In my pocket was the USB drive with 8 years of work, documentation, and evidence. I didn't know exactly when Vorric's house of cards would collapse, but I knew it would. And when it did, I'd be long gone, watching from a distance as he finally faced the consequences of stealing something he could never truly own. I spent my first week of freedom doing absolutely nothing work-related. I slept in, went for long runs, caught up on books I'd been meaning to read for years. My phone stayed mostly silent, which was exactly what I wanted. But on day 8, the first crack appeared. It was a LinkedIn message from Orlith in Legal. Brief, professional, but the subtext was clear. Hey Aaron, hope you're doing well. Quick question about the Frankfurt compliance documentation. Vorric mentioned you handled the initial research. Do you have any notes you could share? Bit of an urgent situation. I stared at the message for a full minute. Urgent situation. That was corporate speak for everything's on fire. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I opened my laptop and did something I'd been avoiding. I checked in on what was happening at Apex. The company's Slack, which I technically still had access to for another week, per standard offboarding protocol, told me everything I needed to know. I scrolled through the channels, reading between the lines of increasingly frantic messages. In the engineering channel, Fendril had posted, "Can someone clarify the database migration sequence? The documentation Vorric provided doesn't match the actual system architecture." In the project management channel, meeting with Vorric rescheduled for third time this week. We'll update when we have clarity on timeline. In the private leadership channel, which I probably wasn't supposed to still see, board meeting moved up to Friday. They want a full technical review of the infrastructure project. Jonathan, we need Vorric prepared. I closed the laptop and made coffee, processing what I'd just read. It had been 8 days since I left, and the wheels were already coming off. My phone buzzed. This time it was a text from Kalis. Aaron, I know you've moved on, but we're in trouble. Vorric can't answer basic technical questions. The client calls are disasters. Can you help? Even just a consultation. I set the phone down without responding. Then another message, this one from Sylvan. Please. I know we didn't support you when we should have. But the project is collapsing. People are panicking. I felt something then. Not satisfaction exactly. More like vindication. They were learning what I'd known all along. Vorric had stolen the map but couldn't navigate the terrain. On day 10, Jonathan called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again an hour later, then again that evening. Finally, I listened to the message. Aaron, it's Jonathan. Look, I know you've moved on, but we have a situation here. The board is asking questions about the infrastructure project, and Vorric is struggling to provide answers. I'm not asking you to come back. Just maybe a call? An hour of your time to help us stabilize things? We'll compensate you, of course. Please call me back. I deleted the message. The next day, a Friday, I got an email from Eryndor Valtric, the board member I'd spoken with during my last week. The subject line read, Urgent Matter, Apex Infrastructure Project. I opened it. Mr. Valtric, I hope this email finds you well. I'm writing to request a meeting at your earliest convenience. The board has some concerns regarding the infrastructure expansion project, specifically around implementation details and technical viability. Given your foundational role in developing this framework, your insights would be invaluable. This is a matter of significant importance to the company's future. Please let me know your availability. I sat with that email for an hour, reading it over and over. This was the moment. The board was circling, and they wanted answers that Vorric couldn't provide. I could ignore it, walk away completely, let Apex figure it out on their own. But something about Castro's message felt different. This wasn't about saving Vorric. This was about protecting the work itself, the project I'd spent years building. I wrote back, Mr. Castro, I'm available for a call Monday morning. However, I should note that I'm no longer an Apex employee, and any consultation would need to be formalized appropriately. His response came within 10 minutes. Understood. I'll have our legal team draft a consulting agreement. Would 10 a.m. Monday work? I confirmed and spent the weekend preparing, not to save anyone but to make sure the record was crystal clear about who had built what and who had failed to execute it. Monday morning at exactly 10 a.m., my phone rang. It was a conference call. Castro, 2 other board members, someone from legal, and Jonathan. Vorric wasn't on the call. "Mr. Valtric, thank you for making time," Castro began. "I'll get straight to it. We're 3 weeks into Vorric's leadership of the infrastructure project, and we're seeing significant gaps between what was promised and what's being delivered. Client implementations are stalled. Technical questions go unanswered. We need to understand what's happening." "What specifically would you like to know?" I asked. "Let's start with the technical foundation. Is the framework sound? Is this a matter of execution, or are there fundamental problems with the approach?" "The framework is sound," I said clearly. "I spent 3 years developing it, testing it, proving it with pilot programs. The technical foundation isn't the problem." "Then what is?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "The framework requires deep technical knowledge to implement. It's not just a strategy document. It's a complex system with interdependencies, edge cases, and integration challenges that require expertise to navigate." "And Vorric doesn't have that expertise," Castro said. It wasn't a question. "I can't speak to Vorric's current capabilities. I can tell you that when I left, the project was on track. The timeline was clear, the resources were allocated, the technical challenges were documented with solutions. Everything needed for success was in place. But it's not succeeding." "No," I agreed. "It's not." Another board member spoke up, a woman I didn't recognize. "We've reviewed the town hall presentation." Vorric struggled to answer technical questions. "Is that because the plan wasn't complete, or because he didn't understand it?" This was the moment. I could be diplomatic, could soften it, could leave room for ambiguity. Instead, I told the truth. The plan was complete. I can provide documentation showing the development timeline, the technical specifications, the implementation roadmap. All of it was finished before I resigned. If Vorric couldn't answer those questions, it's because he didn't understand the work he claimed to have led. Silence on the line. Heavy, weighted silence. "Are you saying," Castro asked slowly, "that Vorric misrepresented his role in developing this project?" "I'm saying that I built the framework over 3 years. Vorric was involved for approximately 2 months, primarily in an observational capacity. The presentation he gave to the board was based on my work. The strategy, the technical approach, the implementation plan, all of it originated from my research and development." "Do you have evidence of this?" "I have timestamped documents, email records, version histories, and third-party testimony from everyone I collaborated with." "Yes, I have evidence." Another pause. "Then, would you be willing to share that evidence with the board?" "Under the appropriate legal protections and compensation structure, yes." "We'll arrange that," Castro said. "One more question, Mr. Valtric. In your professional opinion, can this project succeed under current leadership?" I thought about Vorric scrambling to answer questions he didn't understand, trying to execute a vision he'd stolen but never comprehended. "No," I said, "not without someone who understands the technical foundation. The project will fail, and when it does, it will damage client relationships and the company's reputation." "Thank you for your honesty," Castro said. "We'll be in touch." The call ended, and I sat in my apartment, staring at the wall. I'd just thrown Vorric under the bus. Professionally, completely, with evidence to back it up. I should have felt guilty, should have felt something other than the cold satisfaction settling in my chest. But I didn't. 2 days later, I got an email from Apex HR. Vorric had been placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation into, quote, "professional conduct and misrepresentation of qualifications." The next day, I signed a consulting agreement with Apex. They wanted me to come back, not as an employee, but as an independent contractor, to stabilize the infrastructure project. The rate they offered was 3 times my previous salary. I accepted, but with conditions. I would report directly to the board, not to Jonathan. I would have full authority over project decisions. And I would have it in writing that my original authorship of the framework would be formally acknowledged. They agreed to everything. On Friday, exactly 2 weeks after I'd walked out of Apex, I walked back in. But this time, I wasn't the quiet guy in the background. I was the expert they couldn't function without. Vorric's office, the one that used to be earmarked for me, was empty. His nameplate was gone. His personal items had been cleared out. Jonathan met me in the lobby, looking haggard. "Aaron, thank you for coming back. We need you." "I know," I said simply. We walked to the conference room where my old team was waiting. Kalis, Sylvan, Fendril, all of them looking relieved and ashamed in equal measure. "All right," I said, setting down my laptop. "Let's fix this." Over the next week, I learned the full extent of the damage. Vorric had made promises to clients he couldn't keep, committed to timelines that were impossible, and approved technical approaches that fundamentally didn't work. He'd been faking his way through every meeting, hoping no one would notice. But people had noticed. Clients were threatening to pull contracts. The board had lost confidence. And Vorric had been fired, not just placed on leave, terminated for cause, with legal considering whether his misrepresentations constituted fraud. I didn't follow up on what happened to him after that. Didn't ask, didn't care. He'd made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. As for me, I rebuilt what had been broken, stabilized what had been shaken. Within a month, the project was back on track. Within 2, we'd exceeded the original projections. And when Apex offered me a permanent position as Vice President of Technical Innovation, reporting directly to the executive team, I accepted. Not the role Vorric had stolen. Something better. Something I'd actually earned. Because the thing about stealing someone's work is that eventually you have to deliver, and if you can't, everyone finds out who the real builder was all along. 3 weeks into my return as Vice President of Technical Innovation, I got a call from a number I hadn't seen in months. Mom. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello?" "Eryndor." Her voice was tight, controlled. "We need to talk about your brother." I leaned back in my office chair, looking out at the city skyline. "What about him?" "He's devastated. He lost his job, his reputation. The family is worried about him." "He lost a job he stole," I said calmly. "A job he wasn't qualified for. That's not devastation, that's consequences." "You didn't have to destroy him like this. You could have helped him, trained him. Instead, you sabotaged your own brother." I felt the old familiar pull, the instinct to apologize, to smooth things over, to be the one who bent so everyone else could stay comfortable, but I'd spent too many years in that position. "Mom, I documented my work. I told the truth when the board asked questions. Vorric destroyed himself by lying about what he'd built. I didn't sabotage anyone." "He's family, Eryndor. Family helps each other." "He had 8 years to help me. Instead, he took credit for my work, poisoned my professional relationships, and smiled while doing it. That's not family, that's theft." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your father would be ashamed of you." That one stung, even though I knew it was coming. Dad had always favored Vorric, always excused his behavior, always expected me to be the bigger person. "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not ashamed of myself anymore. And that matters more." I heard her sharp intake of breath. "So that's it? You're just gonna let him suffer?" "I'm gonna let him face what he earned." "Just like I'm facing what I earned. The difference is, I earned it honestly." She hung up without saying goodbye. Over the next few days, I got messages from other family members. My Aunt Colleen, asking if I could find it in my heart to forgive. My cousin Kaylor, suggesting I was being vindictive. Even old family friends reached out, painting me as the villain in a story where I'd been the victim for years. None of them asked what Vorric had done to me. None of them acknowledged the theft, the betrayal, the years of being erased. They only saw that golden boy Vorric was hurting, and quiet Eryndor must have caused it. I blocked most of the numbers. Life was too short to keep explaining myself to people who'd already decided I was wrong. But there was one conversation I couldn't avoid. 2 months after everything settled, I ran into Vorric at a coffee shop near my apartment. He looked different, thinner, older somehow. The confidence that used to radiate off him had dimmed to something uncertain. We made eye contact. For a second, I thought he'd leave. Instead, he walked over. "Aaron," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I gestured to the empty chair across from me. He sat down, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he didn't drink. "I know you probably don't want to hear this," he started, "but I'm sorry." I waited, didn't make it easy for him. "I convinced myself that I was just as responsible for that project as you were, that my contributions mattered as much as yours. I believed my own story." He looked up, eyes tired. But I was lying to myself. I stole from you. I know that now. What do you want me to say? I asked. Nothing. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I understand what I did, and that I'm trying to be better. I studied him for a long moment. Part of me wanted to twist the knife, to remind him of every betrayal, every stolen moment. But another part, the part that had finally found peace, just felt tired. I hope you figure it out, I said finally, but I can't be part of that process. You need to rebuild your life without me in it. He nodded slowly, stood up. I understand. For what it's worth, you deserved that promotion. You always did. He left, and I sat there finishing my coffee, feeling something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but release. The weight I'd been carrying for years, the anger, the resentment, it started to lift. Because I'd finally learned the most important lesson: some people will never see your worth until they lose access to it, and by then it doesn't matter anymore. 6 months after returning to Apex, I stood in front of the same conference room where Vorric had failed his town hall presentation. But this time, the energy was different. The infrastructure project had exceeded every projection. We'd expanded to 4 new international markets, increased efficiency by 37%, and secured 3 major client contracts that had seemed impossible months ago. The board had called this meeting to officially recognize the success. But as I looked out at the faces, the applause, the genuine respect, I realized something profound. This wasn't what I'd been fighting for all along. The promotion, the recognition, the vindication, they were satisfying, sure, but they weren't the victory. The real victory was simpler and harder than that. I'd learned to value my own voice more than other people's approval. After the meeting, I declined the celebratory drinks and drove to Lake Windermere, a quiet spot an hour outside the city. I sat on a bench overlooking the water, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. My phone buzzed, a text from Kress. "Thank you for coming back. We wouldn't have made it without you." I smiled slightly. They probably wouldn't have, but that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I'd done the work because it mattered, because I'd built something worth protecting. Not because I needed to prove anything to anyone. I thought about the 8 years I'd spent at Apex before everything fell apart. All that time, I'd believed that competence would speak for itself, that hard work would naturally lead to recognition, that staying quiet and humble was the path to respect. I'd been wrong. Competence without advocacy is just invisible labor. Hard work without boundaries is just exploitation waiting to happen. And staying quiet doesn't make you humble, it makes you forgettable. Vorric had taught me that in his own twisted way. He'd shown me that the story you tell about yourself matters as much as the work you do. The difference was, his story was a lie built on stolen foundations. Mine was truth that I'd finally learned to speak out loud. I wasn't angry at him anymore. Anger required energy I didn't want to spend. But I also wasn't going to let him or anyone like him back into my life. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some relationships are meant to end so better ones can begin. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from a startup in Silicon Valley. They'd heard about my work at Apex, about the infrastructure framework that had become an industry talking point. They wanted to discuss a chief technology officer position. The salary made my eyes widen. I stared at the email for a long time. A year ago, I would have agonized over the decision, worried about being disloyal, concerned about what people would think. Now I just felt curious, interested, open to possibility. Because I'd learned the hardest lesson of all. You can't build a life on other people's approval. You can only build it on your own integrity, your own standards, your own willingness to walk away from anything that diminishes you. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the lake turned dark and mirror smooth. I stood up, stretched, and walked back to my car. Tomorrow, I'd respond to that email. Maybe I'd take the meeting, maybe I wouldn't. But whatever I decided, it would be my choice, made on my terms, without the weight of old patterns holding me down. Vorric had tried to steal my career. Instead, he'd accidentally given me something more valuable, the realization that I didn't need anyone's permission to claim what I'd earned. Not his, not the family's, not even my own doubt. I'd been the quiet one for too long, mistaking silence for strength, compliance for peace. But real strength wasn't about staying quiet. It was about knowing when to speak, when to fight, and when to walk away with your head held high. And peace wasn't about avoiding conflict. It was about being okay with who you were, even when other people weren't. I drove home that night with the windows down, music playing, feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped playing a game where the only way to succeed was to make myself smaller. Some people would always see me as the villain in Vorric's story, and that was fine. They weren't writing my story anymore. I was. 18 months later, I stood in my corner office at Quantum Systems, the Silicon Valley startup that had reached out that day by the lake. I'd taken the CTO position, and we'd just closed a Series B funding round that valued the company at $500 million. The infrastructure framework I'd built at Apex had become the foundation for something even bigger here. But this time, my name was on every patent, every presentation, every article written about our technology. There was no ambiguity about who had created what. My phone rang. It was a number I recognized but hadn't heard from in over a year. I answered. "Aaron, it's Jonathan." My former boss at Apex sounded older, tired. "I wanted to reach out. I owe you an apology." I waited, letting him fill the silence. "I should have seen what Vorric was doing. I should have protected you, recognized your contributions, questioned his sudden expertise. I failed you as a leader. I'm sorry." "I appreciate that," I said, and I meant it. The apology didn't change the past, but it acknowledged the truth. "For what it's worth," Jonathan continued, "I learned something from that whole situation. I've been working on being more aware, more questioning. Not just taking charisma at face value." "That's good," I said. "That's growth." We talked for a few more minutes, then ended the call on decent terms. Not friendship, but mutual respect. Sometimes that's enough. I looked out at the San Francisco skyline, the city glowing in the afternoon sun. Somewhere out there, Vorric was rebuilding his life. I'd heard through mutual connections that he'd taken a junior position at a marketing firm, starting over, working his way up honestly this time. I hoped he succeeded, not because I'd forgiven everything, but because his success or failure no longer had anything to do with me. The lesson I carried forward wasn't about revenge or justice. It was simpler than that. Your voice matters. Your work matters. And anyone who asks you to stay silent while they take credit for your life doesn't deserve access to either. I'd spent years being the background, the support, the one who made others shine. Now I was building my own light. And it turned out I'd been bright all along. I just needed to stop dimming myself for people who were never going to appreciate it anyway. 5 years later, the morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my home office in Palo Alto. I'd just finished a video call with our Tokyo team. Quantum Systems had expanded to 12 international offices now, and the infrastructure framework that started as a quiet project at Apex had become an industry standard. My calendar pinged. Coffee with M. Valtric, 10 a.m. I stared at the notification for a moment. When Vorric had reached out 3 weeks ago asking to meet, my first instinct had been to decline. But something in his email felt different. No charm, no deflection, just a simple request to talk, with no expectations attached. I drove to the cafe we'd agreed on, a quiet place in Mountain View, far enough from both our professional circles to feel neutral. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He'd ordered my usual without asking. Some habits, I supposed, die hard. "Aaron," he said, standing up. He looked settled now, not quite like the old Vorric, but not like the broken man from the coffee shop encounter either. Something in between. Someone who'd done the work of rebuilding. We sat down, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "I've been following Quantum Systems," he finally said. "What you've built there is remarkable." "Thank you." "I'm not here to ask for anything," he added quickly. "I know we're past that. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I wanted you to know that I finally understand what I took from you. Not just the promotion or the project. I took your story and tried to make it mine. And I'm sorry. Truly sorry." I nodded slowly. The apology felt real this time, earned through years of actual self-reflection rather than immediate consequence. "I'm at a small agency now," he continued. "Entry-level work, mostly. But I'm building things honestly this time. My own ideas, my own effort. It's harder than I ever admitted to myself, creating something from scratch. I understand now what you were doing all those years while I was taking shortcuts." "I'm glad you're finding your way," I said, and I meant it. "Mom asks about you," he said quietly. "She won't admit it, but I think she finally sees what happened. Dad, too, before he passed." That caught me off guard. Dad passed? 8 months ago. Heart attack. It was quick. Vorric's voice was steady, but I could see the grief there. "He asked for you at the end. Said he wished he'd been a better father to both of us. That he'd held us to different standards and it wasn't fair to either of us." I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot I didn't know I'd been carrying. Not forgiveness for the past exactly, but an acknowledgement that even the people who failed us were capable of growth, of seeing their mistakes. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," I said. "You had no way of knowing, and after everything I wouldn't have expected you to come even if you did." He took a sip of his coffee. "But I'm telling you now because he was right. I was given passes I didn't earn, and you were held to standards no one could meet. That wasn't fair, and it shaped both of us in ways that weren't healthy." We talked for another hour, not about reconciliation or rebuilding what was broken, but about acceptance. About understanding that family could be both the people who hurt you and the people who finally learn to see you clearly. About the fact that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or returning to how things were. As we stood to leave, Vorric extended his hand. "I don't expect us to be close again, but I hope someday we can be cordial, maybe even friendly from a distance." I shook his hand. "Maybe. Time will tell." Driving back home, I thought about how far I'd come from that morning in Jonathan's office, from the quiet analyst who believed silence was strength. I'd learned that boundaries weren't walls, they were foundations. That speaking your truth wasn't arrogance, it was survival. That walking away from toxicity wasn't giving up, it was choosing yourself. My phone rang. It was Elena, my partner of 2 years, the person I'd met at an industry conference who saw me for who I actually was, not who I could be useful as. "Hey, how'd it go?" she asked. "It went well," I said. "Better than expected." "Still want to grab dinner tonight, or do you need space?" That was Elena, always checking in, always respecting my process, never pushing. "Dinner sounds perfect," I said. "I'll tell you about it then." Because that was the thing I'd finally learned. You could hold space for complicated truths. You could acknowledge that someone had hurt you deeply while also recognizing their growth. You could set boundaries while leaving room for the possibility of healing, even if that healing never resulted in closeness. The scar tissue from those years at Apex would always be there, but scars weren't weaknesses. They were proof that you'd survived something that tried to break you, and that you'd come out stronger on the other side. I'd spent so long trying to prove my worth to people who couldn't see it. Now I built things with people who never questioned it. I spoke up in rooms where I used to stay silent. I walked away from opportunities that would have been impressive on paper but corrosive to my peace. And most importantly, I'd learned that the opposite of betrayal wasn't revenge. It was building a life so authentic, so aligned with your own values, that what anyone else did or didn't do became background noise to your own symphony. That evening over dinner with Elena, I told her about the conversation with Vorric, about Dad's final words, about the apology that finally felt real, about the strange peace that came with accepting that some relationships would never be what you wanted them to be, and that was okay. "So what now?" she asked. "Do you think you'll stay in touch with him?" I considered the question. Maybe occasionally, but not in a way that costs me anything. I'm done sacrificing my peace for other people's comfort. She reached across the table, squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you. For meeting with him, for holding your boundaries, for knowing the difference." That night, I sat in my office and pulled up a blank document. I'd been thinking about writing down the whole story, not for revenge or vindication, but as a record. A reminder to my future self about what I'd learned, and maybe a guide for anyone else who'd ever been made to feel invisible while someone else took credit for their light. I titled it, "Brother Stole My Promotion After 8 Years. I Resigned with a Smile. He Got Fired 2 weeks Later." And I started typing. Not because I was angry anymore, not because I needed to prove anything, but because some stories need to be told, not to hurt those who caused harm, but to help those who've experienced it know they're not alone, that there's a path through it, and that on the other side of that pain is a version of yourself you never knew you could become. The version who knows their worth, who protects their peace, who builds their own light instead of dimming themselves for others. The version I'd always been, underneath all the years of silence. The version I was finally free to be. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.